Welcome to Revenza Tales, where secret truths cast long shadows across immaculate lives. Like, subscribe, and share this story with the entire world. Leave a comment with your city. How far has Caroline's tale of uncertainty reached? In a suburban Chicago community, one invitation tears a family's veneer, sweeping a mother into a vortex of suspicion and deception. The autumn dusk wrapped the Chicago suburbs in shades of gold and amber, leaves crunching beneath her feet. Caroline Foster emerged onto her porch, her nurse's scrubs still stuck to her skin after a long day at the hospital. The air was clean, with the smell of wood smoke rising from a neighbor's chimney. She stooped to pick up the mail, her fingers trailing over the cold metal of the mailbox, when a cream-colored envelope caught her attention. Its dense, costly paper rang out among the bills, engraved with refined bold script, Vanessa's writing, unmistakable. Caroline's chest contracted, a sudden familiar ache as she penned out her younger sister's name. Vanessa, 5 years younger, had always been the shining light, the standout who overshadowed her. Only their parents' voices echoed through childhood. Copy Vanessa, Caroline, she's daring. Caroline, the responsible one, had shouldered the burden of expectation, whereas Vanessa danced through life, colorful and unencumbered. I'm home, Caroline said, entering the comfort of her home, the aroma of apple pie still wafting from breakfast. Her 7-year-old son, Aiden, came running from the hallway, his sneakers squeaking against the hardwood floor. Mom, I drew a dinosaur at school today, he exclaimed, his eyes shining with pride. Mine was the best, said the teacher. Caroline knelt, running her fingers through his tousled brown hair, her exhausted smile authentic. That's wonderful, sweetheart, she whispered, her voice warm, gentle. After dinner, will you show me? She watched from the kitchen as her 10-year-old daughter, Emma, slumped over her homework, her pencil scratching unsteadily. Jason, her husband of 15 years, leaned against the counter, unloosening his tie, his dark hair dotted with premature gray. He filled coffee, the machines gurgle a soothing hum, his movements smooth, automatic. The tableau was a wonderful family photo, one Caroline had crafted with love, pride bubbling up in her breast. But under it, a sharp unease began to simmer, as if a shadow skated over the sun. Any interesting mail? Jason asked, sounding offhand as he added sugar to his cup. Caroline pushed up the envelope, her fingers trailing on its sleek surface. It's from Vanessa, she stated, her voice toneless, although her heart was racing. She slid it open, the paper tearing gently, and her breath caught. She's engaged, she whispered. To Richard Grant. Jason's eyebrows leapt upwards, his coffee mug suspended in the air. The developer? He asked, wonder dancing in his eyes. He's a household name in real estate, isn't he? Caroline nodded, her eyes still trained on the invitation's refined font. Richard Grant was a giant of Chicago's business world, a name that was synonymous with wealth and power. The wedding's in 3 months, she said, going over the details. Your entire family's been invited. That evening, after putting Aiden and Emma into bed, Caroline sat on her bed, the invitation in front of her. The bedroom was still, except for the quiet hum of the radiator, the glow of the lamplight casting shadows around the walls. Vanessa's life had played out like a fairy tale, top of her class at law school, a high-powered firm, and now a flashy engagement. Caroline's fingers ran over the raised letters, her thoughts traveling back to their childhood. Vanessa had always been ahead, her laugh brighter, her aspirations larger. Caroline, the practical one, had established a solid life. A nurse, a mother, a wife. But it was dull in comparison to Vanessa's sparkle. Jason came out of the bathroom, his hair wet from the shower, his towel draped over his shoulder. He saw her face, the invitation still clutched in her hand, and sat down beside her, the mattress sagging. What's wrong? He queried, his voice soft, his hand sweeping against hers. Caroline let out a breath, her eyes on the paper. Just Vanessa, she said, her voice low, with something she couldn't identify. Everything always seems to turn out right for her. Jason's hand squeezed hers, his smile warm but teasing. Caroline, you've got a great life, he said, winking. A solid job, 2 amazing kids, and me. Pretty good deal, right? She forced a smile, her heart warming but not fully eased. I know, she said, her voice quieter. I'm just tired. The next morning, Caroline stood by the kitchen window, the dawn light filtering through the blinds. She dialed Vanessa's number, her fingers hesitating over the phone, the invitation still on the counter. "Congratulations on your engagement," she said when Vanessa answered, her voice bright but strained. Vanessa's laugh was radiant, bubbling through the line. "Thank you," she said, her excitement palpable. "I can't believe it, Richard's perfect Caroline." She paused, her voice softening. "You'll help with the wedding, right? We're sisters after all." Caroline's lips curved into a smile, though her chest tightened. "Certainly," she said, looking at her hospital schedule stuck to the fridge. "Just let me know what you need." "Lunch tomorrow?" Vanessa asked, her voice hopeful. "I want to give you all the information." "Fine," Caroline replied, her voice calm for the turmoil of feelings. "I'm looking forward to it." After hanging up, Caroline remained standing, the phone still warm in her hand, her reflection dim in the window. She was delighted for Vanessa, really, but a sickening unease nagged at her, the way a persistent whisper refuses to be silenced. Her union with Jason had been founded on love, hot in its initial stages, a maelstrom of illicit kisses and common aspirations. But following Aiden and Emma, life fell into rhythm. Safe, familiar, but without its spark. Nothing was amiss per se, but something was wrong, like a photograph ever so slightly out of focus. She shuddered, dismissively pushing the idea aside, attributing it to the tension of her sister's announcement. The next day at lunch, Vanessa was radiant, her red hair glowing in the warmth of the cafe, her smile contagious. She told it all, how she had met Richard at a benefit gala, his offer of marriage under a dark sky full of stars. Caroline sat, her coffee growing cold, her smile attentive but taut. Then Vanessa's tone shifted, her eyes softening as she reached for Caroline's hand. "I've always wanted to be like you," she said, her voice earnest. "You were always Mom and Dad's pride, with your perfect family." Caroline blinked, stunned, her coffee cup pausing mid-air. "Me?" she asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. "But you're the successful one. Law school, the firm, now Richard." Vanessa shook her head, her smile wistful. "Maybe in my career," she said, her gaze elsewhere. "But you have kids, a husband who loves you, that's what I've always wanted." Caroline's throat constricted, irony writhing in her chest. Her sister envied the life she'd started questioning, the perfect family that became less so by the day. Weeks went by, and Caroline balanced wedding planning with her shifts at the hospital and family responsibilities. The autumn of Chicago grew, leaves accumulating on the sidewalks, the wind sharp with impending winter. One evening, as she put Aiden into bed, his dinosaur painting taped proudly to his wall, he glanced up, his eyes sober. "Mommy, I don't like Uncle Richard," he said, his voice tiny but adamant. Caroline hesitated, her hand across his forehead, her kiss lingering. "Why not, dear?" she asked, her voice soft inquiring. Aiden hesitated, his fingers twisting the edge of his blanket. "He always hides his phone when I'm around," he said, his eyes narrowing. "Like he's doing something bad." Caroline chuckled, brushing it off, though a prickle of unease stirred in her chest. "He's just a busy businessman, honey," she said, smoothing his hair. "He deals with important stuff. Don't worry." Aiden's frown lingered, unconvinced, but he nodded, his eyes still wary. Caroline reassured herself that it was the imagination of a child, fueled by wedding planning pressure. Subsequently, when she walked into the living room, Jason was on his phone, speaking in a low, urgent voice. He looked up, caught sight of her, and soon ended the call, changing his face into a forced smile. "Who was that?" Caroline asked softly but with accelerated heartbeats. "Just a business call," Jason replied, his hands nervously adjusting his tie. "Sorry, I'm late again, the project's behind schedule." Caroline nodded, her smile tight, though she'd noticed his late nights growing frequent. Weekends, too, were punctuated by emergency meetings, his briefcase always ready by the door. She pushed the thought away, blaming her nerves, Vanessa's wedding, the pressure of it all. Their family was happy. She had to believe that. The day before the wedding, the hotel lobby buzzed with preparations, floral arrangements spilling over tables. Caroline, in her nurse's practicality, sewed up plans with the staff, her clipboard a barrier to her discomfort. Aiden and Emma were to be at the hotel pool, splashing under adult supervision. But as Caroline walked across the lobby, her glance picked up movement through the expansive windows overlooking the parking lot. Aiden, his diminutive body bent, was pacing around Richard's shiny black Mercedes, looking into its tinted windows. Her heart missed a beat, a combination of alarm and confusion propelling her into the street, her heels clacking on the asphalt. "Aiden, what are you doing?" she shouted, her tone crisp as she walked up to him. He turned around, wide-eyed, surprised, his hands crammed into his pockets. "Just checking something," he muttered, kicking the pebbles with his sneaker. "Checking what?" she asked, her tone gentler but insistent, her gaze probing his. "Nothing," he replied, his eyes falling, his voice almost inaudible. Caroline wrinkled her brow, confused, but didn't press, the wedding day chaos pulling at her focus. "Let's get you to the pool," she said, escorting him in. "It's time to get ready for the rehearsal dinner." That night, the rehearsal dinner buzzed with laughter, family members greeting each other beneath chandeliers. Caroline smiled, playing sister and coordinator, but her attention couldn't help returning to Jason. He kept checking his phone, thumb scrolling, face strained. He left the room once to take a call, his low voice, his back to the space. When he came back, Caroline leaned in, her voice gentle but inquiring. "Everything all right?" she asked, her hand on his forearm. "Just a work thing," he replied, his smile hasty, evasive. "Need to deal with it tonight, sorry." Caroline's chest constricted, dismay mixed with distrust. "Tonight?" she asked, her voice sharper. "The wedding's tomorrow, Jason." "I know," he said, his eyes avoiding hers. "It's an emergency. I'll be back in a couple of hours." She nodded, swallowing her frustration, her nurse's pragmatism urging her to understand. "All right," she said, her voice steady. "I'll take the kids to the room." In the hotel room, Emma played on her tablet, her giggles a soft backdrop. But Aiden sat on the bed, his knees up, his chin on them, his eyes far away. Caroline sat next to him, her hand light on his shoulder. "Something's wrong, buddy?" she asked, her voice soft and worried. "When's Dad home?" he asked, his words serious for a 7-year-old. "Soon, when he gets done at work," she said, sweeping a clump of hair from his forehead. "It's a big day tomorrow, so let's go to bed." Aiden paused, his fingers following the pattern on the bedspread. "Does Uncle Richard do good things?" he asked abruptly, his eyes seeking hers. Caroline blinked, surprised, her heart pounding. "Absolutely he is," she replied, her tone firm but inquisitive. "Why do you ask that?" Aiden shrugged, his eyes lowering. "Just, never mind," he murmured, his voice fading. Caroline leaned over and kissed his forehead, smiling to hide the tension twisting in her chest. "Don't think too much about it, sweetheart," she said, shooing him toward the bathroom to brush his teeth. But as she tucked him in, her thoughts came back to his words, a shadow of uncertainty creeping in. Once the children slept, Caroline sat by the hotel window, watching Chicago's skyline twinkle outside. Jason had not come back, the clock ticking on past midnight, her calls to him going unanswered, filled only with voicemail. When the door finally opened, Jason slid inside, his tie undone, his face creased with fatigue. "Sorry I'm so late," he said, his tone low, strained. "The problem was more complex than I expected." Caroline looked at him, his tension clear, his eyes sidelong. "Is everything all right?" she asked, her voice steady but questioning, her heart pounding. "Yeah, we fixed it," he said, unfastening his tie further, his movements abrupt. "Why are you still awake? You need to rest." "I was waiting for you," she replied, her voice gentle but weighted with unasked questions. She needed to believe him, to hold on to the vision of their happy family, but the fissures were spreading, could not be avoided. The wedding morning saw the hotel vibrating with expectation, scents of flowers and coffee filling the air. Caroline, in her bridesmaid dress, helped Vanessa in her suite, the white gown shimmering like a dream. Vanessa's eyes sparkled, her voice trembling with joy. "I can't believe this day is here," she said, gazing out the window, her reflection radiant. "Caroline, thank you. This wouldn't have happened without you." Caroline hugged her, her smile genuine but strained. "If you're happy, that's all that matters," she said, her heart heavy with doubt. The ceremony was perfect, smiles and music in the air, a celebratory aura surrounding the guests. But Caroline's eyes intercepted Jason sharing glances with Vanessa, a slight wink that was too intimate, too intentional. Her breath caught, her thoughts racing. Was it merely a friendly gesture or something else? Then she spotted Aiden, holding his smartphone, videotaping something during the ceremony, his attention concentrated. He did not use technology often, content to use crayons and paper. She waved to him to halt, her eyes firm, but he looked at her for a moment, then went on, his face inscrutable. As the reception started, toasts ringing down the corridor, Caroline saw Vanessa edge towards the bathroom, her white dress flowing behind her. A movement caught her eye, and her heart sped up, suspicion closing in. The reception hall was filled with the hum of laughter, the ring of glasses, and the soft beat of a jazz band. Caroline Foster had stood frozen in the hallway, her heart racing like a drum against her ribs. She'd followed her sister Vanessa moments before, anticipating assisting with her wedding gown. She saw Jason, her husband, standing outside the restroom instead, his hand on Vanessa's arm. Their hushed words, their too intimate position, held an intimacy that wasn't familial. Caroline flattened against a velvet-draped wall, her breath husky, her hands shaking against the cold plaster. The Chicago hotel's dim light stretched long shadows, echoing the uncertainty seeping into her heart. Vanessa's white dress glimmered as she laughed quietly, her eyes clashing with Jason's. He moved closer, his whisper unheard, but his look was one Caroline hadn't seen in years, tender, unguarded. Her stomach twisted, the party music a bitter irony to the treachery happening before her. She eased back onto the dance floor, her knees trembling, her bridesmaid gown sticking to her perspiration-slickened body. It was Vanessa's wedding day, a day of love, but Caroline's reality skewed, ready to shatter. She pasted on a smile, her lips stiff, her gaze sliding around the group to ground herself. Guests whirled beneath chandeliers, unaware of her angst, their laughter sounding like muffled thunder. At the table, Aiden sat, his 7-year-old body slouched, his hands tapping his smartphone. His usual glint was missing, replaced by agitated tension, his eyes flicking to the screen. Caroline sat next to him, her voice gentle but tight. "Something wrong, buddy?" she asked, her hand sweeping over his shoulder. Aiden looked up, his brown eyes weighed down with a determination beyond his years. "I'll tell you later," he whispered, his voice too low to be heard over the music. Caroline's chest constricted, her nurse's intuition catching something wrong, but she nodded. "Okay," she replied, smoothing his hair, her smile hiding the panic growing inside of her. The band moved into a slow waltz, the MC's voice echoing through the hall. Then, a dance by the bride's sister, Caroline Foster, and her husband Jason, he declared, his voice cheerful. Caroline's heart skipped, her practiced smile wavering as Jason drew near, his hand extended. She stood, her motion automatic, her fingers chilled as they touched his warm clasp. On the dance floor, he rested a hand at her waist, his touch accustomed but strange, his other hand holding hers. The music whirled, a mournful tune that echoed her discomfort. "You look lovely," Jason spoke softly, his eyes probing hers. "That dress is lovely on you." Caroline attempted to smile, her lips shaking, her thoughts recalling his kiss with Vanessa. "Thank you," she said, her voice hardly firm. Jason drew her nearer, his breath warm against her ear. "Something troubling you?" he inquired gently but persistently. "No, nothing," she fibbed, stealing a glance at Vanessa, glowing as she talked with a partygoer. Her sister's glow, once a source of resentment, now a guise for something evil. Caroline's heart battled, guilt over distrusting Vanessa, fear that her doubts were legitimate. Perhaps it was paranoia, the pressure of wedding planning getting the better of her. Perhaps Jason's brush against Vanessa's arm was innocuous, a brotherly touch misinterpreted. But Aiden's words reverberated. He conceals his phone as if he's doing something wrong. The dance finished, the roar of the crowd a muffled din in her ears. Caroline walked back to the table, her legs weighted, her smile a thin disguise. Aiden waited, his little face strained with anxious tension, his fists gripping his smartphone. "Mom, we have to leave immediately," he hissed, his voice low, his hand pulling hers. The happiness of the reception, guests giggling, glasses clinking, was a cruel taunt to surround them. Caroline went to her knees, looking up at him, her voice steady though her heart was pounding. "Why, sweetheart?" she asked, her palm resting against his cheek. Aiden hesitated, his hands shaking as he unlocked his phone. "See this," he said, his voice little above a whisper, presenting her with the phone. Caroline's breath caught as the screen flashed, showing a photo that stole the air from her chest. Jason and Vanessa, the previous day in Prague's hotel lobby, their hands together, their faces close, intimate. She swiped, shaking, her hands, each photo a deeper slice. Jason's arm around Vanessa in a corridor, their heads bent together in a car. "I used Emma's tablet," Aiden said low, his eyes welling up with tears. "A message from Dad appeared, and I saw these in error." He stopped, his little body shaking. There were pictures of lots of Dad and Aunt Vanessa. Caroline gasped, her heart shattering, the phone weighing in her hands. "Aiden, you," she began, but he interrupted, his voice clogged. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said, tears streaming down his face. "I knew Dad was acting badly. Poor Uncle Richard." Caroline pulled him into a hug, her arms tight around his small body, her own tears threatening to fall. "You didn't do anything wrong," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos in her chest. "Thank you for telling me, brave boy." Aiden sniffled, his voice muffled against her shoulder. "Yesterday in the lobby, I saw Dad and Aunt Vanessa talking," he said, his words halting. "Dad saw me with the tablet and got mad, like he was hiding something." Caroline's hands trembled as she scrolled through the photos again, each one a shard of betrayal. The final image showed Vanessa handing Jason a folded document, their fingers lingering too long. She opened the messages, her breath hitching as she read their words. Flirtations, plans, secrets spanning years. The reality was impossible to deny. Jason and Vanessa were having an affair, and Richard, the bridegroom, had no idea. Aiden's voice cut through her trance, firm but tiny. "Mom, Dad and Aunt Vanessa are doing something wrong," he told her, his eyes huge with worry. "Poor Uncle Richard. Let's get home." Caroline's world spun round, her 15 years of marriage dusting to ashes in her palms. 2 kids, a home based on trust, a sister she'd loved in spite of their competition. Every one of them betrayed. The reception's happiness, laughter, toasts, music, dissipated to a faint hum, her reality shrinking to the feeling of Aiden's phone in her hand. She gazed into her son's eyes, his bravery a light shining through her tempest, his little hand firm in hers. "Aiden, I appreciate you sharing this with me," she said, her voice strong, but her heart breaking. "You're so honest and brave." She hugged him once more, her tears wetting his hair. "But we can't go yet," she told him, firming up. "Uncle Richard is owed the truth." Aiden's eyes widened in surprise, his small fist clenching in hers. "Uncle Richard?" he asked, his voice shaking but trusting. "Yes," Caroline said, drying her tears, her nurse's practicality leveling her. "This is an adult situation, but for your sake, I can do what is right." She stood, her bridesmaid dress glinting with light, her face a mask of resolve concealing her agony. "Let's go together," she said, grabbing Aiden's hand, her heart racing as they made their way through the sea of faces. The reception hall was a whirl of smiling faces, clinking glasses, and floating dresses. Caroline's gaze searched for Richard, her heart pounding, the phone searing in her pocket. She saw him in a corner, his pressed suit sharp, his smile friendly as he talked to business partners. Caroline drew a deep breath, her hand firm on Aiden's shoulder, her voice level but determined. "Richard, may I have a word with you?" she asked, her voice measured though there raged a tempest within. "It's urgent." Richard's smile wavered, his eyes catching the tension in her face, the tightness in her stance. "Of course," he said, stepping away from the group, his voice laced with concern. "What's wrong? Is there a problem?" Caroline cast a look at Aiden, his tiny body firm by her side, his bravery giving her strength. "Let's discuss this outside," she said, taking them to the hotel garden, the phone weighing heavily in her hand. The night air was crisp, the muffled music and laughter a distant echo amidst the rustling leaves. In the stillness of a corner, lit by the soft light of a lantern, Caroline stood opposite Richard, her throat constricting. "I have to tell you something," she stated, her voice shaking but firm, every word into the unknown. "It hurts, but you need to hear it." She hesitated, her hand resting on the shoulder of Aiden, finding strength in his being. "Aiden discovered something," she announced, producing the smartphone, its screen a shining beacon of truth. "Please take a look at this." Richard grabbed the phone, his forehead creasing as he examined the first picture. Jason and Vanessa, hands locked, faces too close. He scrolled, his face changing from puzzlement to growing horror, then to a silent, festering rage. Each picture, hallway hugs, car rides, the incriminating document, set his jaw harder, his hands shaking. "How long?" he rasped, his eyes fixed on the screen. I don't know, Caroline replied truthfully, her voice firm even as she hurt. Aiden discovered these by accident, being a good boy. Richard breathed out, a harsh, agonized sound, and returned the phone, his expression a grim mask of betrayal. I sensed that something was wrong, he confessed, his voice low, his gaze far away, fixed on the blackened garden. Vanessa's late evenings, her covert calls, I assumed wedding stress. He hesitated, his fists tightening, his voice cracking. But this, with Jason? Caroline's heart wrenched, her own treachery reflected in his anguish, their lives torn apart in tandem. I'm so sorry, Richard, she whispered, her voice barely audible, her tears held in place by sheer force of will. I thought you had the right to know. Richard nodded, his eyes coldening, a tempest building behind his composed mask. The sound of the hall music floated softly, a hard reminder of the party they'd abandoned. Caroline grasped Aiden's hand, the courage of her son a lifeline, as they stood in the chill, the truth a dense burden between them. The hotel garden was suffused with moonlight, the Chicago evening air stinging with the smell of pine and frost. Caroline Foster stood shaking, her hand around Aiden's, the screen of the smartphone burning with incriminating proof. Richard's face, lit by the gentle gleam of the lantern, contorted from bewilderment to agony as he scrolled through images of Vanessa and Jason. His jaw clenched, his eyes black with betrayal, the celebratory buzz of the wedding reception a mocking echo. Caroline's heart thudded, her nurse's calm unraveling, the weight of her broken marriage bearing down on her chest. Aiden's small hand was firm in hers, his bravery a lifeline amidst the tempest of her disintegrating world. Then, a voice cut through the quiet, clear and bewildered. What are you doing? Vanessa demanded, her white wedding dress illuminated by moonlight as she entered the garden. Caroline spun round, her breath stopped, her eyes colliding with those of her sister. Jason stood at Vanessa's side, his face set, his eyes focused on the smartphone in Aiden's hand. Vanessa's face changed, confusion replaced by unease as she caught the stiffening gaze of Richard. What are you all discussing? She asked once more, her tone higher, her hands crumpling her veil. Richard's tone was low and measured, each word a knife. The truth has been revealed, he said, showing her the phone, its screen a flash of betrayal. I didn't think I'd find out about you and him on my wedding day. Vanessa's face went white, her eyes bulging, her mouth opening in a soundless gasp. Jason moved forward, his hands up. His voice cracked with manufactured calm. Richard, there's been a misunderstanding, he said, his gaze flashing to Caroline. We were merely discussing work. Caroline's voice sliced through, quivering but firm, her fury boiling over. Stop it, she said, her hands trembling, her gaze fixed on Jason. 15 years of marriage, 2 kids, a trust-based family. You violated it all. Vanessa grabbed for the phone, her actions wild, but Richard yanked it away from her, his eyes reading the screen. Glowing on the dark face. Can we have dinner tonight? I said Richard the first have a meeting. Aloud, Richard read, his voice raw, each word an insult. So this was the meeting you had in mind, he accused, his eyes blazing at Vanessa. Silence descended, thick and oppressive, the garden's cold creeping into Caroline's bones. Aiden held onto her hand, shivering on his small form, his eyes open with bewilderment and grief. Vanessa's poise crumbled, her face streaming with tears, her voice cracking. No, it's not like that, she wept, her hands wringing her gown. Caroline's heart hurt, but her voice remained firm, cutting through the darkness. What's it like, Vanessa? She asked, burning with pain in her eyes. Why with my husband? Vanessa's tears gave way to fury, her voice exploding, raw and poisonous. You were always better, she screamed, her eyes flashing with anger at Caroline. Parents' pet, straight-A student, perfect family. I was always living in your shadow. She caught her breath, her chest shaking, her voice sinking to a bitter whisper. Jason was the only one who knew me, who saw me. Caroline stood stock still, her breath suspended, irony knifing through her chest. She had envied Vanessa's intelligence, her achievement, never dreaming her sister envied her back. But no excuse for betrayal, no reason for destroying her family. Richard's voice cut through the stillness, icy and definitive, his eyes locked on Vanessa. The wedding is off, he declared, his voice unyielding, his fists bunched. A home cannot be established on deception. He turned to the guests in the distance, his silhouette stark against the lantern's glow. "I'll apologize to everyone tonight," he said, his voice steady but heavy with pain. Jason stepped forward, his face pale, his voice pleading. "Caroline, please listen," he said, his hands outstretched, desperate. "We just—" "Enough," Caroline interrupted, her voice calm but steel-edged, her eyes meeting his. "Our marriage is over." She hesitated, her eyes softening as she regarded Aiden, then hardening once more. "For the sake of the children, depart quietly tonight." Aiden gazed up at his father, his little face creased in puzzlement, his eyes brimming with unshed tears. Caroline knelt down, her hand soft on his cheek, her voice gentle but firm. "Let's go find Emma and home," she said, her heart aching for her son's hurt. She wheeled around to Vanessa, her sister's face streaked with tears, a reflection of her own pain. "A real family doesn't turn on one another," she stated firmly, her voice unflinching despite the tears in her eyes. "They stand by, they love. You betrayed me, Vanessa, but I don't hate you." She hesitated, her breath tremulous, her determination unshakable. "Just don't return to my life." She pulled Aiden's hand through the garden, the music of the reception dying behind them. Richard's words climbed, high and hurt, as he addressed Vanessa and Jason, but Caroline did not glance back. 6 months passed, and the Chicago suburbs burst into spring, the air filled with the fragrance of lilacs. Caroline stood in the front yard of her new red brick home, its windows shining in the sunlight. She unloaded bags from her vehicle, the divorce settlement completed, a new book opening. "Aiden, Emma, get your bags," she shouted, her tone cheerful but stained with the ghosts of the past. The children emerged from the car, their giggles ringing out, each of them carrying a tiny bag into their new life. They'd come back from a weekend with Jason, their outing scheduled but therapeutic, a delicate bridge being constructed. Caroline had gotten a part-time counseling position, her psychology degree now used to guide others through family pain. Her own scars, betrayal, loss, uncertainty, informed her work, her compassion a silent strength. Aiden was coping, his therapy sessions with the school psychologist alleviating the weight of that terrible day. Some evenings, he'd wake up screaming from nightmares, his voice childlike. "Mom, it wasn't my fault, right?" Caroline would cradle him, her voice calm, her heart heavy. "Good for you, sweetheart," she'd tell him, smoothing his hair. "You were very courageous." He was coming back to trust, his weekends with Jason becoming lighter, his questions less harsh. One weekend he'd asked, "I think Dad loves me, but why can't you two be together?" Caroline responded patiently, her tone soft but truthful, showing him that love could fail but continue in different ways. Emma, more reserved, worked through her hurt in art, her drawings covering the new house with color. There was a ring at the door as Caroline put a kettle on the stove, the vapor twisting in the morning light. She opened it, her breath hitched as Richard stood there, holding a potted lavender in his hands. "A housewarming present," he said, his smile warm, his eyes holding a shared meaning. "Something that grows, for something new to start." Caroline welcomed him in, her heart lighter, a friendship born of the ashes of their shared deception. They'd had coffee weeks following the called-off wedding, their hurt an unspoken connection, their talk a healing path. "Thanks for being honest with me that day," Richard said, sprawling on the living room couch, his coffee mug warm between his palms. "It was harsh, but preferable to a life constructed from lies." Caroline nodded, her smile gentle, her eyes far away. "Aiden's bravery saved us both," she said, her voice firm. "He noticed what we did not, bore a weight too heavy for a child." Richard leaned in, his eyes warm, appreciative. "You raised an amazing kid," he said, his voice sincere. Aiden didn't just capture images. He felt the deceptions, took action to protect his family. Caroline's eyes shone, pride and anguish blending in her chest. "It was too much for him," she said, her voice soft. "But he's healing, learning to trust again." She paused, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug. "We're all learning." The children's laughter drifted from the backyard, Aiden and Emma chasing each other through the grass. Caroline glanced out the window, her heart swelling, the wounds of betrayal slowly scarring over. One night, with Christmas Eve snow dusting the windows, Caroline sat by the fire, its heat a silent solace. The last 6 months had been a trek through hurt, but mending had started, thread by thread. Social media had carried rumors, Jason with another, Vanessa quitting Chicago to relocate to a far-flung office. Their affair, constructed on stealth, had collapsed quickly, a house of cards that could not endure the truth. The doorbell rang, bringing Caroline out of her reverie, the firelight casting shadows about the room. She opened the door, her breath stumbling as Vanessa stood before her, her coat powdering with snow. Her sister was skinnier, her eyes tired, weighing heavy with guilt, her assurance lost. "Do you have time to talk?" Vanessa asked, low and shaking. "I broke up with Jason. It was a mistake, all of it." Caroline hesitated, her own heart a knot of anguish and compassion, her hand resting on the door. The betrayal burned yet, but the mood of the season, the comfort of her new home, thawed her determination. "The children will be glad to see you," she said, pushing open the door. "It's a special day, come in." Vanessa moved slowly into the house, her steps uncertain, her gaze moving to Caroline's, seeking forgiveness. Aidan stood in the hallway, his eyes going wide, a mix of surprise and wariness on his face. He hesitated, then delivered a small wave, his voice quiet but distinct. Carefully he said, "Merry Christmas, Auntie," his smile tentative but true. Caroline's throat constricted. Her son's forgiveness an act of grace she was still finding out about. The fire popped, sending warm shadows dancing as they sat, the silence thick with unresolved words. Vanessa's voice shattered the stillness, her hands knotted together, her head bent. "I was in the wrong, Caroline," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I was jealous of you, thought I could steal what you had, but I destroyed everything." Caroline heard, her own heart heavy, the sister she'd loved and resented now a stranger asking for forgiveness. "It's not about blood," Caroline said, her voice firm but gentle. "Family is honesty, trust, sometimes forgiveness." She paused, her eyes locking with Vanessa's. "We're starting over, but it'll take time." Vanessa nodded, tears falling, her hands trembling as she reached for Caroline's. The road to rebuilding was uncertain, but Aidan's courage had lit the way, a beacon of truth guiding them forward. This is Revenza Tales, where truth pierces the shadows of secrets. The names and places have been changed to protect those involved. We bring you this tale not to pass judgment, but to consider the strength it takes to confront betrayal and restore trust. Would you, in Caroline's shoes, confront the deception or maintain the silence to maintain the harmony? Leave a comment with your opinion and your city. How far has this story gone? Like, subscribe, and share to keep such stories alive. On your monitor, discover 2 of our favorite stories, poised to touch your heart. Thank you for accompanying me. May truth and forgiveness guide you to better days. God bless.